Welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. With over 20 years of real estate experience and selling over 150 homes a year, Laura Sanders is the #1 RE/MAX agent in the state of Florida for 2021. Join us each week as we discuss how to make money through buying and flipping homes to renting versus selling and everything in between. To join the conversation, call in live 888-994-4995, Studio A.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. Every week, we talk about something that will help you make a little money, save a little money, or maybe just help you navigate the crazy world that we live in. Well, the world's getting crazier for us realtors. Starting next week, we're going to be dealing with what's called the NAR Settlement, which is now going to affect buyer's agents. What does that mean for buyer's agents? Well, tonight we have Charles Esposito with JK Closings here to talk about what's going on with this NAR settlement and how it's going to affect us. It could be a pretty expensive weekend if we don't have our stuff together. That's all I got to say. So welcome, Charles.
Thanks for having me, Laura. Always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about the NAR settlement, and we're going to do call-ins tonight. So if you are listening, the phone number to call in is going to be 1-888-994-4995, and we're in Studio A. So if you are thinking about calling in, I did post it today on Facebook, and I've been sending it out to people. If you do have questions, which I have questions.
Yeah, I will answer your questions and anyone else who calls in, and hopefully I can answer them.
Okay, great. And if you don't call in, too bad for you. So my first question is, and I know we were talking about it briefly, is that there's a paper that we're going to have to give to a buyer.
Yeah.
Now, it's going to kind of suck if we pull up in our car and we get there and we go, hey, by the way, before I can let you in this house, I need you to sign this document. Because I feel like if we send it before we go, we send it electronically to sign, it's going to be sitting there for electronic signatures. Nothing's going to happen. So we get there. Do we have to explain this document, or I mean,
it's always helpful to explain the document to a buyer. And in this situation too, you're talking about maybe you got a cold call or you got a lead from online and you haven't sat down in your office with this buyer yet. So you haven't given them your whole presentation as to why they should hire you. But this settlement is stating that you can't show them the property without them signing an agreement that meets all of the terms of the settlement. So there are all sorts of different forms that you can use for this as well, as long as they're compliant. So, you have to get them to sign it, otherwise you can't show them. I would say that the comforting thing for buyers realtors, though, is that everyone has to abide by this new rule. So now it's going to be standardized across the industry, and it's going to professionalize the buyer side to where buyers are going to have to sign an agreement. So, Laura, if it feels awkward for you in the beginning to have to say, you have to sign this agreement, everyone else is going to have to do this as well. And if you don't do it, you could get fined.
right. Do you know what the fine is? Because I heard it was $1,000 per house.
It is $1,000. Yeah.
Per house?
It's $1,000 per showing that you don't have an agreement signed. And they're going to have testers for this as well. They're going to have undercover people from Florida Realtors that are going around and asking to see properties, and they're going to see whether or not agents are getting them to sign showing agreements ahead of time. And if they don't, you could get fined. So just like they have fair housing testers and things like that, they're going to have testers.
So if I get to let's just say you call me up and you say to me, hey, I'd like to see 123 Main Street. Now, 123 Main Street happens to be my listing. I don't need any sort of agreement signed to show 123 Main Street, correct?
That's correct. If you have somebody that shows up to your listing, you don't need an agreement to show them that property. However, best practices might be to have them sign an agreement, because you as the listing agent might then be the procuring agent, meaning you're the one who's responsible for getting that person in the door and maybe getting a contract from them. If they leave and bring another agent back to submit an offer on their behalf, you missed out on that as the listing agent. Or there could be a dispute over who's the procuring agent. So for listing agents in that situation, we recommend that you have them sign an agreement. It doesn't have to be the exclusive buyer broker agreement. It could be a showing agreement. It could be kind of a watered down version of some of these agreements that are out there. But I do recommend that listing agents have an agreement signed with buyers that show up to their property to see it.
So I had one agent tell me that they weren't going to be showing buyers per se, but they would do like an upfront cost, right? Mm-hmm. So if they
like
wanted
a retainer.
Well, it was weird. Like if a buyer wanted to go look at a property, let's say they wanted to go look at 123 Main Street, my listing. Mm-hmm. The buyer would call me, right? And they would say, I would like to see this property. Now, they don't want, let's just say my 123 Main Street, what the seller does not want to offer compensation, only to the listing agent, right? I'm still obligated as the listing agent to show that property to anybody, right? Because other people aren't going to show it if there's no compensation, typically.
You're obligated to your seller to provide offers, and you don't necessarily have to show anybody the property that wants to go see it. Yeah, but how are you going to sell it?
Right.
You know, and so if your seller is not offering cooperating broker compensation, meaning the seller offering to pay the buyer's agent, well, you as a listing agent don't necessarily have to perform work on behalf of the buyer, but you still have to perform work on behalf of the seller, which might include showing properties to buyers that aren't represented by an agent.
Right. And then this realtor saying, listen, for like $29.95, I'll write any contract on any house you want, and to make sure that you're represented appropriately. Is that like that's legal?
Yeah, I mean, is that fair value for the services?
I won't show you anything. Yeah, I'm not going to show you any properties.
Yeah,
like you have to get in on your own.
But I'll draft the contract. So in that scenario, I happen to think there's going to be a lot of buyers that enter into multiple agreements with buyers agents, and it's gonna end up being a problem for some people. But there's going to be things that happen like that, just like they have like these flat rate listing services, but then you still might end up with an agent that's representing you because you realize that the flat rate listing service is not really helping you. They're not answering phone calls. Buyers are going to sign all sorts of low end agreements with buyers agents and then realize that they need help negotiating. They need help getting inspectors. They need help with all of the things that you do as a buyer's agent to actually help them get under contract and get to closing. And they forgot that your time is worth money, you know, and $29.95 is probably not going to cut it for what buyers are expecting buyer's agents to do for them.
So, okay. So, I mean, if you think about it, though, it makes sense, right? If I say, listen, for $29.95, I'll do whatever you want, but I'm just not going to show you the properties.
Yeah.
So then if they want to see a property and there's a listing agent and there's no compensation, so I guess what does the listing agent then say to the buyer when they call to see the property and say, well, there is no compensation on this one in order for you to see? I mean, you got to sell it. Like, seems so confusing, right?
It is a little bit confusing. I mean,
I guess if you're taking the listing, then you know that you're only getting paid and you're going to have to show it.
Well, and not only that, but you as a listing agent, if your seller's not offering cooperating broker compensation, you know, you've already negotiated with them what your fee is on that property as a listing agent. Right. So, you know, if it's 3, 4, 5, 6%, whatever it is, and there's no cooperating broker compensation, you've already negotiated your fee to sell that property, you know? So don't undercut yourself as a listing agent. You're going to get buyers that come without representation. You get that now, you know? And usually in a listing agreement, listing agents will say to a seller, well, if I'm the one who procures the buyer on this, then my fee is this. You can still do that, you know? And we do recommend that you have an agreement with the buyer anyway, though, to protect yourself.
Right.
How many buyers will show up to an open house or call you up and then talk with you, negotiate with you, come to a purchase price, and then have their cousin submit the offer, and then their cousin gets paid, but you did all of the work for them.
But if you could prove that you did that, I mean, what happened? Yeah. Remember, we used to have the transaction broker signed before we'd show a property. I mean, and then all of a sudden that disappeared. Like, you know, it says we're dealing honestly, accounting for all funds, which obviously you're supposed to do. So, like, to me, it was like, duh. what happened to that form? Why do we not have that anymore?
Yeah, well, they've modified the forms now for buyer broker agreement, showing agreement, and a lot of them are transaction broker forms, but there's also other forms, single agent form, no brokerage relationship form. There's a lot of different forms that are out there, and I would caution buyers that are going to purchase a house and are hiring agents to maybe have an attorney review what those forms are before they sign them, because they're going to be all over the place as to what's being signed. So we're moving back in that direction where now it's going to be required to have forms signed. It's just a matter of what will those forms say, because they could say a lot of different things. The NAR Settlement only provides like 5 different rules that actually have to be in the forms,
right.
And some of them are that the fees need to be conspicuous. They need to be objectively ascertainable. So for instance, you can't write in the form, my fee is whatever the seller is willing to pay me.
No, it needs
You
to
can't
say
write that in
3%
there.
or 2.5%. And if the seller's offering,
yeah, it could be a flat fee. It could be a range.
If it's offering 3 and you put 2.5, you're only going to get 2.5, right?
It needs to be objectively ascertainable. And to your point, you can't get paid more by the seller than what you agreed to get paid for by the buyer. So if the buyer is agreeing to pay you 2% and the seller's offering you 3%, you can only get 2% as a buyer's agent unless you modify that agreement. So agents that are out there, they shouldn't be undercutting their value.
Right.
If you want to give a credit back to your buyer, okay, great, that might help get the deal done. But if you start off low, then you have nowhere to move from.
Right.
That's not really great from a negotiation
standpoint. So agents pay
standpoint.
attention to that you need to really just start these agreements at 3%. And then,
or there are agents that are doing flat fees too. They say every property, it doesn't matter whether it's a $50,000 condo or a $500,000 house, my minimum is $5,000. And so whether it's $5,000 or 2.5%, that whichever is higher, that's my fee. I have agents that are doing that.
So how do you say that?
$5,000 or 2.5% of the purchase price, whichever is higher. That's objectively ascertainable. Now, do we know 100% whether or not Florida Realtors, NAR, is going to accept all of these different types of agreements that buyers and buyer brokers are going to sign and come up with? I'm sure that there's going to be, complaints filed in court. There's going to be litigation. It will take years to figure out what is legal, what is not legal, what is ethical, what is not ethical. There's going to be a lot of different agents that try to do a lot of different things with these agreements. And again, there's only a couple of guidelines that actually need to be in there.
Well, if you think about it, right, a few years back, they were trying to get rid of mortgage brokers. They were trying to do all these different things with how they got paid. And obviously the mortgage brokers have gotten through that. We're going to get through this, but at the bottom of that agreement, it says that it's not a binding, like it's not legal, like that it. What does that mean?
Which agreement?
At the bottom of the buyer broker agreement, it says that it's not like it has all this stuff that says that.
Oh, from Florida Realtors. Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's an interesting thing, and you really don't exactly know what it means if you're not a realtor looking at that form. It basically is saying that Florida Realtors is not giving you legal advice as to whether or not their form that they created is actually
binding?
Not binding, but if it actually will hold up and stand up in court when it is challenged. So none of these rules have gone into place yet, and they will not go into place until August 17th. So then what's going to end up happening is a form will be signed with a buyer, and then some attorney out there will go and try to sue an agent and say that form doesn't meet the NAR settlement guidelines. And then we'll find out from a lawsuit whether or not it does. And that's kind of how all of this came about anyway, is lawyers finding ways to sue agents in the name of protecting consumers. And who knows whether or not any of these changes will actually protect consumers going forward.
Right.
We've heard all sorts of things. Purchase prices are going to come down. We don't know if that's going to be the case.
They already are, but we're going to go to commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about this, because this is like my livelihood, your livelihood. And, obviously you depend on buyer's agents to make your livelihood. So we're going to go to commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about this.
At JK Closing Attorneys, we do all of the same things that a title company does, but with the benefits of being a law office. We can help with residential real estate, short sales, commercial real estate, refinances, 1031 exchanges, and FIRPTA withholding.
Contact JK Closing Attorneys today at 954-332-3111. Again, that is 954-332-3111.
Whether you're buying, selling, refinancing, or building your dream home, you have a lot riding on your loan specialist. Max Fish, a top 1% mortgage loan officer in the nation, will give you a same-day qualifying quote. Max Fish is committed to providing his customers with mortgage services that exceed their expectations. Ensuring that you make the right choice for you and your family is his ultimate goal. Contact Max Fish today at 954-729-6933 or max.fisch@nwmcorp.net.
You have been watching Making Money with Laura. For more information, contact Laura Sanders at 954-650-0827 or visit her website at theloracell.com. And now back to the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Making Money with Laura Sanders. Today, we're talking about the NAR settlement. And let me just tell you, the name of this show is Making Money with Laura Sanders. Let me tell you, let's save you from getting fined $1,000 per showing. Because come next week, if you don't have agreements signed with your buyers, you are going to be wishing that you did not get into real estate and you're going to want to get out. So, guys, we're doing call-ins, 1-888-994-4995. We're in Studio A. If you have any questions, I'd say hurry up because we've got about 10 more minutes before our time's up. So there's a really good question that somebody had called in and asked, and that question was, can we put in the contract what our commission is to be paid to us?
Great question. So on a standard as-is residential contract, it specifically states in that contract that you cannot put compensation in there. If you're a realtor, you look at the bottom of the as-is contract on the last page, it specifically states that I, as a closing agent, have to look at the outside agreements between the client and the brokers to determine what compensation is. And it even now references the MLS, so we anticipate that being updated. But the reason why you can't put it in the contract is because you guys as brokers are not part of the contract. The contract is between the seller and the buyer. You can't modify the listing agreement, which talks about agent compensation, in a contract that the agent is not a party to. You can't modify the buyer's agent compensation in a contract that the buyer's agent is not a party to. So you can't just write on the contract what the compensation is for the agents because the agents aren't part of that contract. So what Florida Realtors has done is they've come out with compensation agreements that the parties have to sign between either the seller and the buyer broker or the listing agent and the buyer broker. And then also you have listing agreements and you have buyer broker agreements. Those are the only forms that you can use to actually put compensation on for agents. And then me as a closing agent, I have to abide by the terms of those agreements.
So for those of us that have buyers currently under contract that are going to close after the 14th of August, where does that put us? Is that still, we're still going to be supported because we have it in writing on an MLS sheet, right?
Yeah, correct. You
so
don't
we don't
have
need
to worry about that.
Okay,
it's already,
our broker's telling us, oh, get it in writing for anything.
Yeah,
the
as long as you have the MLS and you can go back to it. Right now, the MLS has cooperating broker compensation being offered in it. Once you submitted an offer and it was accepted, that's a binding contract between you and the listing broker. So you don't have to do anything to modify it. It's very similar to the listing agreements that we have and the buyer broker agreements that we have. If those expire, but you're already under contract, the contracts extend through the closing date of the transaction. Okay. So for instance, if you have a listing and it expires tomorrow and you sell that property today, but it doesn't close for 6 months, you're still going to get compensated for that, even though your listing agreement expired. Now, if it doesn't close and the buyer backs out and you have to go back to market, you still need to get a new listing agreement.
Right. Okay, so that makes sense. So Before, right? If I was going to show a property, and let's just say they're offering 2% commission, before I would have to negotiate with the agent prior to showing that to my client, correct? I couldn't ask after I showed the property and my client likes it, hey, you're offering 2%, will you pay me 3%? My client likes it, because that's not in the best interest of the client, correct?
Well, I wouldn't say that you couldn't do that. You certainly could. And it doesn't mean that it's not in the best interest of your client, because it really depends on what were they going to pay going forward. So it all depends on how you would negotiate a transaction. Like, for instance, what if the purchase price was lower, but your compensation was higher, paid by the seller? That's better for the buyer. It depends on how you structure the deal. And the clients are paying you guys as agents to negotiate negotiate a deal that's going to be in their best interest.
But I'm saying, if I'm an agent, right, and I've decided to work with a buyer, and my buyer likes a property that is offering 2% commission. I'm talking about where we're at today in today's market before it changes next week, right?
Yeah.
They like that property, and they want that property. I'm not doing what's in the best interest if I say to the agent, listen, I really want 3%. I showed it, they love it, they want to buy it. You need to pay me 3% or I'm not going to give you an offer.
Yeah, you can't phrase it like that, and you can't do it like that if your client wants to enter into contract.
So you could say, will you
however,
pay me 3%?
if you had a buyer-broker agreement
and it was paying 3%,
and it was 3%,
say,
then
listen,
you could go back to the listing agent and you could say, well, listen, you're only offering 2. My clients are paying me 3. In order to make this deal work, I need your seller to pay the other 1%. Well, that's in the best interest of your client because they're paying less money now. So and this is the way it's going to work going forward too. If the compensation is not going to be offered on the MLS, you're going to have a buyer broker agreement that has your fee on it. Let's say your fee is $15,000, flat fee, okay? And the seller is only offering $10,000. Your negotiation is going to be, well, either the purchase price is going to be lower, or my clients are going to have to come out of pocket $5,000. Their purchasing power is lower on a finance transaction if they have to come out of pocket with more money. So you negotiating the deal with the listing agent, hey, this deal is only going to go under contract if we're able to work this out.
Okay. So, but you know how on a contract, right, where it says that the seller is going to contribute 3% towards buyers, prepaids, and closing, right? Well, now I'm asking for a seller to pay for the buyer 3% towards my commission. So where do I put that if it's not part of the contract?
Yeah. So that's different because you're not putting compensation directly to you in the contract. You're talking about a seller concession. So seller concessions are where the seller gives a credit to the buyer, okay? The buyer is still paying you. When I do the closing, okay, you have a buyer's agreement with your buyer that states you get a certain percentage, and the listing agreement says that the listing agent gets a certain percentage. So that percentage from the seller is on the seller side. The percentage from the buyer paying you is on the buyer side. And then there's a credit from the seller to the buyer. So the contract is saying there's a credit from the seller to the buyer. It does not matter where that money is getting applied to on the buyer side. It might be part of your compensation. It might be closing costs that the buyer has. It might be, prepaids that they have, such as the inspection or something like that. And it does matter how you write it on the contract. And I would advise agents to make sure that anything that's written in regards to seller concessions on a contract is run by the lender first to make sure it's compliant with whoever the end lender is going to be on that. Okay, whether it's Fannie or Freddie, you have to meet the guidelines that the lenders have, just like any sort of credit that the lender is given.
Very complicated. So we're going to post this because we're running out of time. We're going to post this when we do. Are you having any upcoming trainings that can help us so that we can get a better idea of how to structure our contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have one tomorrow, but I think it's going to be sold out. Next week on Friday, I'm going to be doing a listing agreement presentation because the Florida Realtors has updated the listing agreement. So be on the lookout for that. We have, it will be on Zoom, so we'll have a Zoom link for that. We don't have the location for it yet. We're going to hammer it down. It's probably going to be somewhere in Broward. We'll see.
Okay, great. So you'll send that to me. I'll put it with this. And guys, I want to thank you very much for listening. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you if they need to get more information and to use you as your closing agent?
954-779-5000. You can call or text, and we'll get back to you.
They always have somebody that responds to their text. Somebody's always got that phone in their hands 24/7, right?
We try.
Try 3 a.m. See what happens. Anyway, thank you for listening to Making Money with Laura Sanders. I am your host. Give me a call if you need a realtor, 954-650-0827. Till next week.
Thank you for tuning in for Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. To join the conversation, call us at the studio, 888-994-4995 Studio A, or contact Laura directly at 954-650-0827. Laura Sanders, a name you can trust.